The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the courtroom, casting a sterile glow on the mahogany benches and polished floor. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant, as though someone had tried to scrub away the tension that lingered in the room. A bailiff shuffled papers at the side, barely glancing up as officers in blue uniforms snickered quietly in the corner. The defendant sat at the front, wrists cuffed loosely, his posture calm, his gaze steady. He was a black man in a neatly pressed suit, the kind you would expect to see behind a lectern giving a keynote, not behind a defendant's table with cops muttering jokes about him under their breath. They thought they knew his story. To them, he was just another man dragged in off the street, another suspect who had the misfortune of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. He leaned back, arms crossed, whispering crude remarks about his suit, about how ridiculous it looked for someone like him to dress that way. One officer let out a stifled laugh, shaking his head. Bet he borrowed that suit for court. Looks like he's play acting. Another chuckled. Yeah, watch him try to talk his way out of this. Classic. The defendant didn't flinch. He sat silently, his jaws set, his dark eyes fixed on the judge's bench as though he were measuring every second of the proceedings. His composure unnerved some of the younger officers, though they covered it with smirk. They were used to anger, protests, or desperation from defendants, not this quiet and unreadable self-possession. The prosecutor, a middle-aged man with thinning hair and a self-important gait, shuffled his notes and cleared his throat. Your Honor, he began, the case before us today involves a defendant who was apprehended during what officers describe as suspicious activity near a government building. He glanced briefly at the officers in the corner, earning a few nods of encouragement. The officers observed the defendant lingering, appearing to surveil the premises. When questioned, he became evasive. Upon further inspection, they found him carrying identification that, well, let's just say it raised questions. More laughter from the back of the courtroom. The officers could hardly contain themselves now. To them, this was entertainment, a break in the monotony of routine arrests. Raised questions, one whispered mockingly, elbowing the other. Yeah, like how he managed to afford that haircut. The defendant finally moved. Slowly, deliberately, he turned his head toward the officers, his gaze sweeping across them like a searchlight. One by one, their smirks faltered, though none of them wanted to admit it. There was something in his eyes, calm, unyielding, assessing, that felt different from what they were used to seeing. It wasn't defiance. It was authority. Authority so deeply ingrained it didn't need to be shouted or brandished. But the prosecutor, oblivious to the tension, pressed on. When the defendant was asked for further identification, he refused to comply in a straightforward manner. Instead, he presented a badge claiming to be associated with federal law enforcement. However, as the officers will testify, the badge was assumed to be fraudulent. No individual fitting the defendant's description could possibly be affiliated with such a high-level agency. Therefore, the state intends to proceed on charges of obstruction, impersonation, and... The courtroom doors opened and the sound of heels clicking on the tile broke through his speech. A woman in a sharp navy suit entered, her stride purposeful, her eyes narrowed as if she had little patience for the scene unfolding. She carried a slim leather briefcase and flashed credentials at the bailiff with a flick of her wrist. The bailiff's eyes widened and he immediately straightened his posture. She walked briskly to the front and whispered something to the clerk, who in turn hurried to the judge's ear. The judge, a seasoned man with silver hair and a stoic demeanor, adjusted his glasses and leaned back. Mr. Prosecutor, he said slowly, before you continue, it seems there may be relevant information that has not been disclosed to this court. The prosecutor frowned, visibly irritated at the interruption. Your Honor, I was about to... The woman in navy cut him off sharply, her voice resonant and clear. Your Honor, the defendant is who he claims to be. This proceeding is a mistake of the gravest proportions. I have documentation from the Department of Justice confirming his identity. She placed the folder on the bench, the embossed seal gleaming under the lights. The officers in the corner fell silent. The sound of their laughter had evaporated, replaced by a heavy unease. They exchanged nervous glances, a few of them swallowing hard. The judge skimmed the documents, his expression tightening with each page. Finally, he looked up, his tone carrying a weight that silenced even the prosecutor. The woman nodded. Yes, Your Honor. The man you see before you is the sitting director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He was on official business when he was stopped and humiliated by these officers. She turned then, her gaze icy as it swept toward the group of uniforms in the corner. The Bureau does not take kindly to its director being treated like a criminal without cause. For a moment, the entire room seemed to stop breathing. The words hung in the air, echoing in the officers' minds with a force stronger than any reprimand they had ever received. The man they had mocked, the man they had cuffed and laughed at, was not only legitimate, but held one of the most powerful law enforcement positions in the country. The defendant finally stood, rising with a measured calm that carried the gravity of his rank. He adjusted his tie, the small motion amplified by the suffocating silence. His voice when he spoke was low and controlled, but it reverberated like a gavel striking. I gave your officers every opportunity to conduct themselves with professionalism. I identified myself. I showed my credentials. Instead, I was mocked, dismissed, and treated like a criminal in the very city where I serve to uphold the law. Do you have any idea what kind of precedent this sets? What kind of message this sends? Not just to me, but to every citizen who looks like me. His words cut deeper than any accusation. The officers stared at the floor now, their bravado drained away, replaced by shame and dread. One shifted uncomfortably, the weight of his own laughter now burning in his ears. Another bit his lip, wishing desperately he could rewind the last few hours. The prosecutor's face had gone pale. He stammered, flipping through his notes as though some piece of paper could save him from the disaster unfolding. Why, Your Honor, if this is true, then obviously the state withdraws. The judge silenced him with a wave of his hand. You've done enough, counsel. Counsel. He turned back to the director, his expression softening with something close to regret. On behalf of this court, I extend my apologies. You should never have been placed in this situation. The director gave a curt nod, his face unreadable. He wasn't interested in apologies. He was interested in accountability. His gaze returned to the officers, who now seemed far smaller than they had an hour ago. Do you know what the Bureau stands for? He asked them quietly. Do you know the oath you swore when you chose to wear that badge? To serve without bias. To enforce the law without prejudice. To protect, not belittle. And yet here we are. The words lingered, heavy and unrelenting. The officers shifted uneasily, some biting back excuses, others praying silently that this humiliation would not end their careers. But deep down they knew it might. The laughter that had once filled the courtroom had turned into a silence far more condemning. As the director turned back to the judge, his voice steadied once again, carrying the calm authority of a man used to commanding entire bureaus. This is no longer just about me, Your Honor. It's about a culture that allows those sworn to protect to treat individuals as suspects based on appearance alone. If it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. And it does. Every day, the judge nodded gravely, his gavel striking the sound block with a sharp crack. This court stands adjourned. The officers filed out slowly, their steps heavy, their earlier laughter now haunting them like a ghost. Every chuckle, every sneer, every mocking word replayed in their minds, no longer funny but damning evidence of their arrogance. The director walked out with the same calm dignity with which he had entered, his cuffs removed, his head held high. The courtroom watched him go, a man who had endured their doubt and ridicule only to reveal a truth that shattered their assumptions. Behind him, the silence spoke louder than any words ever could.